Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 002 of Changing the Face of Yoga. We're talking to Rachel Zinman about diabetes today. Today we have a wonderful guest, Rachel Zinman. Rachel was diagnosed with type 1 LADA diabetes in 2008 at the age of 42. She's been doing yoga since the age of 17, and she still practices, and she's teaching other teachers and beginners alike in workshops, trainings, and retreats internationally. She is a mother, award-winning musician, and published writer. Her blog on Yoga for Diabetes was listed as one of the best blogs for January 2016 by Diabetes Mind. And she's produced several other articles for other publications on diabetes. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us today.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Great. I've looked at your blog and your website, and I was very taken by a statement that you made in your video, which was that when you first realized that you might have type 1 diabetes, you were sure that you could cure it with your healthy lifestyle, which of course included yoga. And yet later you had to start taking insulin. And I do something similar. I'm sure that yoga is going to stop me from having all the awful things that happen when you age. And I found that it doesn't. So what does that say about yoga, that we think that it's almost a cure-all for everything?
I think it's a bit of a misinterpretation of the meaning of yoga. You know, that we see yoga as some sort of a process or a path. And this is something that I really had to come to terms with in my own life after the diagnosis, was that yoga isn't really a process. Yoga is actually the nature of who we are. And to understand the depth of the meaning of the word yoga, you know, yoga means oneness. It doesn't mean steps along the road. And understanding what oneness is, you know. So for me, it actually took me to study more the Upanishads and the traditional meanings of yoga through the sacred texts, rather than just, you know, my interpretation of it as a physical practice. But having said that, I think yoga really does, as a practice, enable you to, you know, rejuvenate the body and support the body to really, you know, be as well as it can be, considering that you're living with a chronic condition or you're dealing with aging or anything like that.
Okay, that's a beautiful thought. I really enjoyed that, because I'm still dealing with, no, it doesn't really stop you from aging, even though I would really like to. Could you first explain type 1 diabetes? I'm sure that we all have some general information about it, but it would be good to be more informed, I think, before we go on with the conversation.
Okay, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. They don't really know how it comes about. I mean, this is the biggest sort of mystery in terms of this chronic illness, because they don't know how it happens, why it happens, and there really is still no cure. But basically what happens is it's an autoimmune disease which attacks the insulin producing cells in the pancreas, which are called beta cells. So we all have these cells which produce insulin, and insulin is used to bring the energy from food, which becomes glucose. It's like the glucose, the energy has to enter into the cell in order for the body to utilize the glucose and work properly. So these beta cells are very, very important because they produce the insulin. Now, what happens with type 1 diabetes is that something starts attacking the cells, these beta cells, and they start to die. And then you no longer produce insulin. So your pancreas is still working, but you're not producing the insulin. And so the buildup of glucose in your system just increases and increases and increases. And when you have more glucose in your system, it sort of acts like a corrosive, and it starts to, affect the small blood vessels in the body. It starts to affect the organs, and, creates a lot of complications.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. You talked about insulin sensitivity. What is that, and how does yoga address that?
Okay, so, insulin sensitivity, now it's very interesting because, there's type 1 diabetes and then there's type 2 diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes is slightly different in that it's not an autoimmune condition. It's actually a condition where the body has gotten to the point where it resists the insulin that's being produced. So the body still produces the insulin, but the cells resist the insulin. As I said, the insulin is it's like a door which allows the glucose to come into the cell. But if the body is resisting the insulin, the cell becomes a shut door, and you can't get that insulin into the cells. So insulin sensitivity, first of all, increasing insulin sensitivity is all about stopping that insulin resistance. So the muscles are amazing because when the muscles are moving and working, they act like insulin and they reduce the amount of sugar that's in the blood. So when you get your muscles active, it increases your sensitivity to insulin, and then the cells are more likely to take the insulin into that, blood cells, so that then it can help to reduce the level of sugar in the blood.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. I've never heard that one before. I mean, that's really helpful. Thank you. Unfortunately, since I teach seniors, I'm amazed at in the 10 years I've been teaching how much diabetes has increased in that population group. I didn't used to see it very much at all, and now I'll have 2 or 3 students every class that have it. So it's becoming much more prevalent, I think. So this is a very important podcast, I believe. You said that your yoga practice really helped you with the stress of having type 1 diabetes. Can you expand on that statement? And is that one of many benefits of yoga for diabetes, or is that the best one?
Oh gosh, there's so many benefits. I mean, like I said, insulin sensitivity, increasing your sensitivity to insulin is a benefit. You get your sleep habits really are changed. So you sleep better when you do yoga because, again, it's, releasing the stress out of the system. It's a great stress reliever. It's helps promote weight loss. Because, you're basically focusing on your breath and moving, and breathing and moving is fantastic, again, for, just getting the heart rate up. It improves memory. It just increases your flexibility and your strength. I think just exercise in general is just so good for you. So I think it helps in that way. I mean, any of the benefits of yoga are going to help you if you're living with any type of diabetes, really.
Okay. I watched the video of one of your students, and I thought it's a really fascinating thing what you're doing, which is that you're working with people who have diabetes, and this individual had type 1, so I don't know if you're working with both, with people who have the other type, but she had type 1, and you actually worked with her one-on-one to really uh, create a practice that was really good for her, given her diabetes, but given who she, what kind of body she had and all of that. And and then she got a video that helped her. But what I really liked about it was that you first worked with her, so she knew how to do it. I think there is a little bit of danger in videos with people who don't quite know what to do with yoga. So I was very impressed that you did that as a two-step process. Is that she seemed very, very happy with it. Are there other students that you have that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, it was a trial that I did because, I am actually just a yoga teacher and I don't normally work, well, I haven't worked just with people who live with diabetes. I mean, I've worked with people for years, just training them to be teachers and also working one-on-one. That was something that I did in New York. I was a private yoga teacher for 5 years, just running all over the city, teaching people. But this was a very specific process that I did, and I worked with 3 or 4 people. Actually, I only worked at that time with type 1, and I started with a questionnaire. The questionnaire was asking them about, how are they coping, managing with their diabetes? What is their emotional relationship to their diabetes? How would they like to improve their relationship? It was a very extensive, sort of personal questionnaire. And then we went through an Ayurvedic questionnaire to determine the type of constitution that they had, were they, did, what kind of sort of emotional habits, mental habits, physical habits, and then just looking at body type. And then once I'd done that, I sort of thought, okay, I want to create a sequence for them. So then I recorded the sequence, and then we met and we went through the sequence. But we didn't just go through the sequence once together. I met with them every week for weeks and weeks and weeks. So they would meet with me and we'd sort of tweak the practice and go through the practice. And then they'd have the sequence on video and say they could do it at home. But what was essential was for me to really make sure that they were physically aligned and that they were safe doing the practice. So I worked with someone who was a little bit, maybe bigger in bones and so, a stronger type. And so that person had a very sort of much more vigorous practice with back bends. Then I worked with someone who was actually dealing a lot with very high blood sugar levels, who wasn't on insulin, who needed a more calming, more restorative practice. And for her, we added a very specific meditation, a very specific breathing practice to kind of slow her down and calm her down and get her more relaxed. And that was, really beneficial to her. I also worked with a guy who, had a lot of physical strength, but he was dealing with a lot of unstable blood sugars. They were sort of, he would drop really low in the middle of the class, or he would, go really high. And that was the other reason why it was really important to work with him one-on-one and not just through an online sort of story, because, I needed to be right there to help him, or to say, hey, let's check your blood sugar. Let's make sure it's still okay. And then you have to have a juice or something like that to bring his blood sugar back up. So I think when you're working with people with diabetes, it is important to be physically with them. Also, just touch is so important, and adjusting and just making sure that they're safe, because it's very calming. I think you can do the online thing, and I do it, but I want to have a connection with the person first.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think it's really important to have that connection first, especially although I haven't had anyone that had any problems in my class who had diabetes, but I would certainly feel very nervous if I were trying to teach older people just on a video. I think that's a very very difficult thing to do, and I really admire that you put so much effort and time into developing these very unique practices for each person. I think that's that's really admirable, because I'm sure it took a lot of time and effort,
Yeah.
but really great.
It was actually a lot of fun. I just want to say that, I think yoga teaching is a really fun thing to do. And, it's if you love it and it's a total joy, you don't mind putting in the time,
Yeah, I agree. Like I said the other day on a podcast where I was the guest, that yoga people are good people. That's just what they are. You touched on this, and I just thought we'd explore it a bit more. You said that there are sleep issues with diabetes. Often, probably not everyone, but could you explain that and what you've been doing with yoga to help with that?
So, I think depending on the type of diabetes you have, but I think this is something that just comes up is, especially if you're dealing with unstable blood sugars, you're either up at night because, you're going into a low, your pump is going off. A lot of people use pumps to deliver the insulin. You can over deliver the insulin, you can under deliver the insulin. You might have, there's just a lot of stress associated with it. So sleeping through the night is not necessarily a given. And you might wake up, sometimes you might have overdosed too much, taken too much insulin. So you've got to stay up and eat, or you can be woken up at 3 a.m. and have, your pump goes off and it's like you're on a low and you've got to get up and eat, and drink some juice or take some glucose tabs, or you've got to eat. And often there's a bit of a joke that people end up, freaking out and eating the whole fridge and things like that. So that's something that happens. But just in general, it's not easy. And also, if you're older, you might be going through something like menopause that really affects your blood glucose levels as well. So they can be very up and down, and you can be waking up all night with that. So I think, the big thing about yoga is that yoga is about the combination of breath and movement. It's not just physical exercise in the sense that you're just moving the body. You're actually also taking the breath and marrying it to the movement so that it's a continuous flow. And when you do that, it literally calms the nervous system. It brings you out of that fight or flight, which is what's waking you up all night, is the body isn't naturally relaxed. You're in your fight or flight. They say that we're supposed to spend 80% of our time in the relaxed part of our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and we're supposed to spend 20% in fight or flight, so that we have all the energy available to us that we need if a tiger is chasing us, or if we need to get out of a stressful situation. But of course, in our modern day society, with all the stress that's placed on us physically, environmentally, emotionally, we spend 80% of the time in our fight or flight. So that is obviously going to spill over into our sleep time. So what yoga does by marrying the breath to the movement is it calms the nervous system down, and it trains the body to kick in that parasympathetic nervous system more often. And I think that's what really helps promote sleep. And also I think, another thing is that yoga practice is not just ha, it's not just physical. They call it hatha yoga. It's also ta, it's moon. So that's our forward bends. It's it's the stretching. It's yin yoga. It's restorative yoga. It's all those fancy names that we've given the yoga where we're kind of just lying around and relaxing. The part of the practice that's like that. Yeah.
Which is a really good part of the practice too, I think.
It's the best part. Yeah.
Often it is, yes. So what kind? I watched your videos, and I recommend that everybody watch them just because they're absolutely beautiful. Of you doing, I believe it was yoga for legs, and they were absolutely gorgeous. You moved so beautifully. But what are those the kinds of movements that you would be giving to someone who had diabetes to help them um, move the muscles and so that the little cells are more open or to the glucose?
Yeah, it so depends on the person. And of course, that practice that you watched, it's a quite a strong advanced practice. So not everybody could do that.
Yeah,
And
I noticed
um,
that. Yeah.
I have to be honest, and often, when I'm sharing a little video like that on Facebook or, on my blog or whatever, it's a little bit like, okay, it's a challenge. It's like a teaser, like, okay, this would be great if you had that flexibility. But someone wrote to me straight away and said, look, I can't do that. And I was like, yeah, no, I know, and so I think there's some very simple things you can do to really keep that strength, to work the legs. And one of them is a basic posture, Virabhadrasana 2, Warrior 2. You can do things like chair at the wall. I think I actually did that in the sequence. You can do things like just pulling up your leg so that your heel touches your buttocks and you're stretching the front of your thigh muscle. And then you're just straightening your leg and lifting your leg out in front of you so that you're, working the thigh muscle. So stretching and strengthening. And you can even do some of those things lying down, like drawing one, knee in towards you and hugging the shin and then straightening the leg. Or you can bicycle the legs. There's just so many things that you can do simply lying down or seated in a chair that will also work those thigh muscles. So one of my goals is, once I've sort of teased everybody and gotten everybody excited by just showing them something totally, that could be challenging, is also to just create something very, very simple as the alternative to that as well. And it all comes down to time, when it comes to doing stuff that people can see online, is that it takes time to record those things and put it all together so it sort of looks, palatable. But yeah, there's just lots and lots of ways that you can increase that insulin sensitivity where you don't have to be doing some sort of full-on athletic asana practice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can understand that, because one of the things that I always do is I work on the quads, the thighs, because those are your independence muscles when you're older, and those are the ones that allow you to get up and down from sitting in the toilet and out of bed. And if you don't have the strength in those legs, you will have to have some kind of care. So I do a lot of those things too, and it's good to know that it flows over and would be also good for people with diabetes, because, like I said, we will have 2 or 3 people in the class that usually have either pre-diabetic or have diabetes diagnosis.
Yeah, no,
And thank you for giving those asanas, those poses that would be good for people with diabetes. I think there will probably be some people listening who have diabetes and will be really interested in the kinds of things that they could do. Do you you said that you do workshops and trainings internationally. Do you have workshops on how to teach people, how to teach teachers about diabetes, or are those workshops on something else?
well, this is my plan, is to eventually be able to, share with yoga teachers how to support people who are living with diabetes. Um, I've written a book. The book's going to be published in October 2017, this year. It's not a book for yoga teachers, but I think yoga teachers would love the book because it really explains diabetes from the Ayurvedic perspective, which is the sister science of yoga. It looks at how to sort of work, like what that person needs. It gives a very specific sequence for what that person needs. So it can be used for people who are living with diabetes type 1 and type 2, and it can also be used by yoga teachers. And then eventually, from the publishing of the book and stuff, I would like to have a, ongoing seminar or workshop for people, very specific. Because I've even just had someone approach me and say, look, I have a lot of people with diabetes who are coming into my class, and, I'd love to have a private with you about how to work with them. And I'm also working on a webinar for Yoga Australia on that topic as well. And I've written articles for them. but I haven't, this for me is a project that, I was diagnosed in 2008. I was in denial for about 6 years. I refused to believe that I even had diabetes. It was a huge shock for me, and I didn't really want to accept it. And then finally, 6 years later, I said, okay, yes, it's true. It's real. It's happening. And then from that point, I started to slowly kind of realize that I might have something to offer to the diabetes community. And then from there, I've wrote the book, and now working with clients who have diabetes, and then slowly. So that's one of my new next goals, is to have sort of physical workshops where people can come and learn from me about what is the disease, how does it work, how can we help them, and that's all sort of coming along the road.
I understand. Yes. What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is Yoga for Diabetes: How to Manage Your Health with Yoga and Ayurveda.
All right. So everybody, did you say October 2017? You can get this book?
Yeah, it'll be released worldwide through distribution, and the publisher is Monkfish Publishing. Yeah, and I will just know, basically, if people go to my blog, www.yogafordiabetesblog.com, there's information about the book there. It just says, Yoga for Diabetes book, and people can click there and get on the mailing list and find out all about when it's going to be released and where and how they can get it.
Okay, great. Yeah. That sounds good. I think I'll be in line. I've learned so much just today. I'm sure the book will be wonderful. Okay, so I'm gonna switch you here just a little bit. I really appreciate you talking about your journey with diabetes, and you said that it took you, I believe, 6 years to really accept that you had it. Is that a common response when someone finds out that they might have not only diabetes, but probably a chronic condition of any kind?
I think I was lucky because it was such a slow onset. So for a long time, I had the blood tests, and I had sort of, it told me that I had, my body was telling the doctors that I had diabetes, but I wasn't having symptoms. And because I was asymptomatic, it was much easier for me not to accept it, because, my blood sugar levels were not high. They were sort of pretty stable, and I was kind of controlling it. But then it got to the point where my body I started losing a lot of weight. I started getting thirsty. I was up all night, urinating. I started having a lot of fatigue. And then it was like, okay, no, this is not good. And the big thing was that I started having neuropathy in my hands, which meant that my hands were tingling and buzzing all the time that I was touching things. And I went to, and I still thought, maybe it's B12 deficiency. I was just in this big denial thing. And then I went to the neurologist, and he said, well, hang on a minute, your blood sugars are really high, and now you've got the beginning of nerve damage. I think you better, do something about it. So, a lot of people, when they have adult onset type 1 diabetes, it comes on very quickly. Like all of a sudden, they lose a lot of weight, they start urinating, they have all the, they have the fatigue, they feel like, their body feels like sludge. And then, they go to the doctor, and it's like, wow, you need insulin straight away. But because that didn't happen to me, because it was a very slow onset, it was much easier for me to avoid it. Maybe in the type 2 community, and I don't want to speak for the type 2 community because I'm much more keyed in with what goes on in type 1. I think people, they get a bit of a wake-up call. They get shocked because their blood sugars are a little bit higher. Then they go on a radical, they go on a diet, they start exercising, and their blood sugars come back down because the insulin is getting into the cells, because they're, increasing their insulin sensitivity through the exercise. So it's much easier for type 2s to kind of go, okay, well, I've got things under control. Maybe then they go a little bit longer without checking their blood sugars or not worrying so much about it. And that's why there's such an emphasis in the type 2 community for people to keep an eye on their blood sugars and to really not stop testing and see, is my blood sugar going up again? Do I need to go back to the doctor? Do I need to keep an eye on this? Whereas in type 1, because you're insulin dependent, you're keeping an eye on your blood sugar like 15 to 20 times a day. You might even be wearing a monitor on your arm to make sure that your blood sugars are steady, things like that. So it really depends on the type of diabetes and the modicum of control that you have as to whether you're going to sort of be in denial a long time or not.
Okay, all right. Well, I can understand that, though. If you really don't have symptoms, it's kind of hard to believe it's just a test that's telling you that. Great. Okay, so I just want to reiterate that. If you want to explore any of the things that we've talked about today with Rachel, you go to www.rachelzinmanyoga.com or her blog at www.yogafordiabetesblog, that's all one word, .com. And she's also on Facebook. So we'd certainly like, if you have any questions or you'd like to explore anything else, please go to those places for some more information. I really want to thank you, Rachel. You've been a great guest, very open and very helpful, and I'm sure a lot of people will, including myself, have learned a lot from hearing you today. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It's been really fun to be here. Thank you.
Good, I'm glad. All right.
Thank you so much for that wonderful interview. Now for the listeners. To be part of Changing the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies, please take a picture of yourself doing your favorite yoga pose and email it to ctfoy@yogalikeness, all one word, .com.au. That is ctfoy@yogalikeness.com.au with your first or full name. I will upload it to the Instagram folder, Changing the Face of Yoga, so we will have an album of the spectrum of students who represent the face of yoga. Please download and review this podcast and tell your friends who might be interested. Thank you, and let's get together next week.